In this episode of The Voice of Yerevan, international relations and security expert Sossi Tatikyan will sit down with me on a very nuanced and intricate topic: political narratives. Baku spins around Yerevan like elaborate spiderwebs. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
3 years of post-war negotiations and a dozen peace treaty drafts later, Aliyev suddenly hardens bellicose rhetoric, calls Armenia a fascist country, threatens to eradicate so-called fascism. Has Baku been negotiating over peace or simulating post-war peace talks? Is escalation Aliyev's true intention?
I believe so. I believe that Aliyev is not interested in peace. He believes that power dynamics and geopolitical developments may be in his favor, and his goal is to obstruct the peace agreement as much as he can, and also to create and develop and promote new false narratives in order to legitimize potential new coercion and even military aggression against Armenia. He has other goals as well. Like, one of his goals seems to be reputational security, which means that because of the ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh and the occupation of our border regions, more than 200, up to 250 square kilometers, he's trying to legitimize both ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh and occupation in our border regions. And also, he is trying to legitimize potential new aggression against Armenia, stigmatizing us and fabricating new endless narratives. And he is always coming up with new preconditions. And just 2 months ago, we believed that there are two formal conditions. It is about withdrawal of lawsuit and also not having third country forces. In our case, it's EU civilian mission, which is actually not a force because it's a civilian observation mission. However, it has these several groupings of preconditions. And in fact, his last two interviews prove that all of them are preconditions or demands. And his preconditions are becoming more and more controversial, and they actually contradict international law. For instance, the totally new precondition that he came up with, which is returning arms supplies to suppliers like to France or India,
Denying Armenia the right to self-defense, basically.
Yes, this is actually contradicting the UN Charter, one of its main provisions, which is that every sovereign state has a right to self-defense, and also it's our sovereignty. And that's why he is fabricating this fascist narrative, because the only way he can raise the issue of disarmament of Armenia or limitations in Armenia's defense capabilities is actually to stigmatize Armenia as an aggressor, occupant, and even fascist state. So all of his narratives actually are very much linked to each other. And now he's trying to discredit us in the eyes of international community. The other objective that he has is to reverse the narratives related to Armenian, Azerbaijani, and Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. He's trying to completely transform the narrative of the conflict and to establish so-called hegemony of the narrative and to achieve our cognitive capitulation. What I mean by that? He is trying to affect our identity, our self-perception, and our self-image. So he's not only aiming to discredit us in the eyes of the international community, but he's also aiming to sabotage our long-term self-perception and identity feeling, and to lead us to cognitive capitulation. And in fact, I am sure that if Azerbaijan is able, it would very much aim to achieve our physical capitulation and maybe even elimination of our statehood. And while those things seemed very extreme assumptions a year ago, now I think that even those international actors who thought that when some Armenian experts claim that Azerbaijan is actually an expansionist state and it has expansionist objectives, and its final long-term objective may be elimination of our statehood, actually even they can see now that his long-term goal may be exactly that. And of course, it's not easy to achieve it because of the rules-based world order, and that's exactly why he is contesting also this rules-based world order. Like in his interviews, he basically mocks the global order and international law, saying that the last several years have shown that this system is not valid any longer, and those states who understood it earlier and built their military capabilities and hard power, now they have an advantage. And it doesn't even hide that its defense budget is at least threefold higher than Armenia's, and that it's aggressively arming. So basically, it's trying to monopolize the right to defense and actually the right to attack, because what he is implying by his statements, it's obvious that he is threatening us with the use of force if we don't fulfill his preconditions and demands.
Ever-growing preconditions further and prolong the possibility of peace, in fact seemingly justify the absence of peace. The expert underscores that denying Armenia the right to self-defense, a breach of the UN Charter in fact, can seem legitimate only if you call the country a fascist state. Doesn't this approach remind you of something? Russia calling for the denazification of Ukraine, for example? Will the international community buy this narrative? In the case of Ukraine, they didn't. You stated that Baku spreads false narratives and basically expressed the idea that these are expansionism, an indication of expansionism and expansionistic behavior. Would you please enumerate the false narratives that you believe indicate this as expansionism?
It's really a huge package. You know, in our field, usually we talk only about several sentences or paragraphs from his speeches, but his two last interviews together constitute more than 60 pages, and it's endless fabrication of narratives. First, against Armenia. Second, about boasting about his military and economic power. And third, finally, he has launched this information warfare against Armenia's international partners, including France, European Union, the US. Interestingly, he targets only Biden's outgoing administration, calling them those Soros people who have been supporting Armenia. And he's praising Trump. He hopes apparently that he will manage to create a favorable environment for its actions during a Trump administration. And he's apparently hoping to get them on his side. I think it's just an assumption, and he can never be sure in that. Also, he is talking about Iran, which, as we know, is also keen on our territorial integrity in the same way as US and European Union and its mission. And interestingly, he doesn't say a negative word about Russia. Quite the opposite. In his first interview from December, which is with the Russian state TV, and to a journalist who is a Kremlin propagandist and is sanctioned by the EU and US, he is praising Russia. He underlines their strategic partnership. He underlines their common values. Interestingly, he also criticizes the Western sanctions towards Russia, and he expresses hope that Russia will be able to consolidate and find a way to overcome difficulties caused by those sanctions. He also talks about Georgian developments, and he brings this, he suggests that Aliyev, the current Georgian government, the current Russian government, and incoming administration of Trump share common values, opposing them to France, especially President Macron, also EU, especially targeting former representative of foreign and security policy, Joseph Borrell, and even former Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, saying that all those are Soros people, those liberal values don't exist anymore. And these were Armenia's partners, and they are disappearing one by one. Returning to his narratives against Armenia.
Narratives come in packages. The West is also a target now in the context of Armenia's steer towards the EU and a signing of a strategic partnership with the US. All international partners of Armenia come under fire now. Only Russia is patted on the back. Why should this matter? Reputation matters in politics for obvious reasons. Western Azerbaijan. Is this narrative not a direct territorial claim against Armenia?
Of course it is. And it is on its turn linked with several other narratives that he is raising. Basically, he calls Armenia a Western Azerbaijan even in his official interviews, and he's saying that there are several 100,000 Azerbaijanis that have been deported from Armenia and even subjected to ethnic cleansing, and they need to return to Armenia. And Pashinyan needs to meet their delegation and discuss secure conditions of their return. This is so complex as a narrative. First of all,
what's the truth behind it?
First of all, he completely denies the ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh and massacres that Azerbaijan has conducted against Armenians in Baku, Sumgait, Kirovabad, which is the current Ganja. Also, Armenians also left Nakhichevan due to very long decades of assimilation and oppression. And the number of those Armenians is at least 500,000, and I think actually it's more. I don't remember the exact number now. On the other side, he's exaggerating the number of the former Azerbaijani minority in Armenia, which was 160,000. They always mention the number 300,000, and then they say several hundred thousand. And then they say that together with their descendants, they are now twice or three times more.
Massacres are conveniently pushed out of the picture. Baku narratives are shades and blinds that blot out the massacres and the mass exodus of Armenians from Sumgait, Baku and Kirovabad. The methodology is mirroring claims, but the devil is in the details. Armenians in Azerbaijan and Azerbaijanis in Armenia have left under very different circumstances. The resemblance in circumstances, it's deceptive, it's on the periphery. What happened in reality to these people that migrated from Armenia to Azerbaijan?
What happened was that there were no massacres, unlike Azerbaijan, where there were major massacres in Sumgait or Baku or Kirovabad. Those people they weren't living collectively. They were kind of decentralized, so they didn't constitute any entity in Armenia, unlike Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, and they mainly lived in villages. And what happened was that when Nagorno-Karabakh conflict started and during the period of the collapse of the Soviet Union, most likely they didn't feel comfortable to continue to live in Armenia, and they basically chose to go to live for Azerbaijan, and they mostly either sold their apartments or whoever or exchanged their apartments, and all of them have received compensation from the Soviet Armenia. Unlike Armenians in Azerbaijan, in Baku and other places who haven't received any compensation, and you know that Armenians in Baku were quite wealthy and they were kind of like elite. And so he is trying to, he was first trying to mirror this issue versus Nagorno-Karabakh Armenia, trying to create kind of a parallel. And now when Armenians are not in Nagorno-Karabakh any longer, he is not only using it in order to save its Azerbaijan's reputation as a state that has conducted ethnic cleansing and which has been basically the consequence of his organized strategy, but he goes much more than that.
One of the preconditions for the peace treaty is the withdrawal of EU-MA from the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Why do you believe Aliyev wants EU-MA to leave?
I think it's also related to his intentions of possible military offensive against Armenia. We saw that once more it blamed Armenian armed forces in shelling Azerbaijani positions. I think it was on 8th January, and we also saw that Armenian Defense Ministry immediately refuted it, and European Union mission in Armenia made a statement which basically meant that there haven't been any violations and everything is fine.
So the mission is basically an obstacle to spreading false information on what's going on the border. Is this the reason, or is there more?
Of course, the mission is preventing Azerbaijan to spread disinformation about Armenia causing escalation. And it serves as a kind of a soft deterrent to possible military aggression by Azerbaijan. It also gives a sense of human security, even if it's just at the level of perceptions amongst people in border areas. So, and this mission is completely civilian, as we know, but now Azerbaijan has fabricated this narrative that it's a NATO proxy and de facto it's a NATO mission only because there is one civilian observer from Canada in the mission, which is a kind of a grotesque claim, especially based on this one person, because it's a very normal arrangement for EU CSDP missions to have third country partner participants. For instance, now Armenia can also participate in EU CSDP missions in other countries. So this is all manipulation, it's obvious. And of course, Azerbaijan doesn't want EU mission in Armenia because it prevents its militaristic objectives and possibility to launch an attack against Armenia or to continue creeping annexation in Armenian territory.
If we sum the whole bunch of narratives up, would you say that they are fabricated to promote expansionism or to legitimize expansionistic intentions of Baku?
Yes, if we watch their behavior in the last several years, they always build up a narrative. So first they are a bit cautious, they kind of throw out an idea to test it, then they intensify it more and more. And I'm afraid that this may signal that they are preparing a military offensive in several weeks or months, and activating these narratives, they are preparing a ground for them to legitimize and get away with them. Another narrative that they activated was the Zangezur corridor narrative that they had actually deactivated in the last several months. But now, actually, in light of this plane crash and Aliyev-Putin telephone conversations, there may even be that they have decided to activate this demand together because they have made a deal about this story of airplane crash, and it involves opening a Zangezur corridor together.
By the way, the latest statement of Aliyev on the so-called fascist quote-unquote Armenia, does it not remind you of the so-called quote-unquote denazification of Ukraine? Is there a danger of Armenia going down the same drain, and how to prevent it? Will, for example, US-Armenia newly signed strategic partnership act as one of the tools of prevention?
I'm afraid that Aliyev's rhetoric totally mirrors Putin's rhetoric about denazification of Ukraine. And he's also this settlement of Azerbaijani former minority in Armenia. He specifically mentions Zangezur, maybe also an attempt to create kind of like a Donbass situation in Armenia. How to prevent it is a $1 million question. And of course, I don't have the answer, except that we need to work very intensively to build our defense capabilities with partners and to continue to diversify our security partnerships and also economic partnership, develop relations with the US and European Union. We need to keep Iran as a partner, and India. Of course, we do understand that all of this is not a security guarantee against Azerbaijan's potential threat, but
what is
we
then?
don't have. There is no security guarantee, and you know, in the light of the current erosion of the global rules-based international order, I don't think that any state, except let's say NATO member states, can have any security guarantee against a potential military attack. And Aliyev knows it, and of course he takes advantage of this, and he mocks this global order exactly for that reason. However, the UN still exists, the Security Council still exists, and in fact, Azerbaijan is very worried that we may reduce the gap in terms of military imbalance between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Of course, we cannot catch up with Azerbaijan because it is so much ahead, and it has a much larger economic resources and military capabilities. But we can reduce this gap to a point when we have sufficient deterrent capability to defend ourselves. And that's exactly what worries Azerbaijan and Aliyev. But we have no any other way except strengthening our resilience, diversify our partnerships, and be strong.
Thank you, Sossi, one more time for this opportunity. So far, the web is there. Hope we managed to pull out a thread or two, not to fall into it. More to come.